right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Cattle HQ Live, a webinar series brought to you by South Dakota State University Extension. My name is Erin DeHaan, one of the co-hosts for the Cattle HQ Live webinar series. And today we have Taylor Grussing, one of our cow-calf field specialists that will be sharing some information to help you prepare for the upcoming calving season. As a reminder, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them into either our Q&A or our chat features, and we'll get those addressed at the end. But without further ado, I'll turn things over to Taylor and let her take things away.
All right, thank you, Erin. Just to make sure everyone can see my slides, there should be two calves on the right side. All
Yep.
right. So thank you for the invitation to present to you guys today. I know it is windy and blustery outside, and so I hope if you are joining us, you're somewhere semi-warm and you have been able to tack down everything that hopefully is not blowing away out there, or you might be able to find it tomorrow. But the couple producers I've talked to today said it might be in the next county. So hopefully, if we don't run into too much more crazy weather as we continue into 2026 and the next calving season. But if we do, there's plenty of time to hopefully still prepare for that. And so those are some of the things we're going to talk about today, and how we are going to start preparing for that calving season. So here's just a brief agenda of several different things we'll talk about, from weather to facilities, supplies, recognizing the normal stages of labor, as well as having assistance, and if there's some calf processing tips we can go over as well over the next hour. So to kind of follow up on that weather comment, we have looked at the next 90-day outlook going into 2026 for just some seasonal weather trends. And it's looking like it's probably going to stay below normal for temperature wise across much of the whole state. So maybe not extremely likely, but a little bit more greater than equal chances to be colder than normal. And then if we look at the precipitation outlook, we are in equal chances to possibly above normal precipitation. And we know that usually comes in the form of snow here in January, February, and March. And so it might be some extra preparation, whether that's with facilities or even bedding, to consider as we start going into the January through March time period, if that's possibly when you are going to start calving. Like Erin said, I'm a cow-calf field specialist based in the Mitchell Regional Office. And so we, kind of cover obviously the eastern side of the state. I think there's, and, in the West, I mean, there's some producers that are calving right now, but I think a majority of us calve in the spring, so that February, March, April timeframe. And so obviously the farther out we get, the outlooks aren't as reliable. But if it's looking like it's going to be colder and wetter than normal, that'll be something to keep in mind as your calving season begins. And why we want to start talking about that now is even with today's temperatures and, over the next couple of months, we want to be feeding our cows accordingly. So that way they can be in adequate body condition score going into that calving season. And so for every 1 degree below a lower critical temperature, we need to supplement some extra energy to those cows. And so like this time of year when we are in that fall time frame, we have that heavy winter coat set in. Our lower critical temperature is around that 18 degrees Fahrenheit. And when you take into account wind chill, like today, we might be feeling like real outside feels like temperature might be 0 degrees, potentially if you have absolutely no protection. And so we might be looking at supplementing, possibly 18% extra energy on a day like today when that wind is blowing cold, it's snowing a little bit. We had a little bit of rain last night. And if we do that, to help them kind of survive these winter cold snaps, that will help them stay in that better body condition going into the next calving season. When we do that, we're giving them extra energy, and we don't want to say that they don't need it, because some people have been known to say, if I feed them more, my calf size is going to grow, and they're going to have more dystocia issues. And we don't feel that that's necessarily the case. Underfeeding, if the cows are thin, does not necessarily reduce dystocia either. And so when we are feeding more when it's cold, that's to help the cow herself, as well as that calf and those nutrients that are going into that calf. But it is not directly related to birth weight or dystocia. Like I said, if we underfeed, it's not going to reduce dystocia. It actually also might cause you some more problems, such as, lower weight gain, so lower body condition, poorer milk production and colostrum quality, as well as possibly a lower pregnancy rate. If females do get higher in condition than desired, they are going to be depositing some fat in that pelvic region, which, yes, it can add to some more difficult births, but it might not necessarily be calf birth weight at that point. So, if there are females that are having some extra body weight put on, we might want to adjust some rations accordingly at this time of year, so that way they're not putting on a lot of extra weight into that calving season. Another thing we want to look at too is, like I said, that body condition score, because those cows will have difficult births too. And if you are going to assess body condition score, we can use that at this time of year. Weaning is another good time, but also right now, 60 to 90 days, maybe before your calving starts, is a good time to look at that, because it gives us adequate time in order to use a ration to add weight to those females. And so our rule of thumb that we like to see going into calving season is to have heifers in a body condition score of 6. So you're not going to be able to see any ribs on the side of them, but not going to be overly conditioned at that point. And then the cows, we shoot for a 5.5. So we're going to see one, maybe 2 ribs on that female. If we look over into how, that might look, if we had like a 60-day window between now and calving season, we shot for a ration that was going to add about 2 pounds per day. That includes pregnancy weight and, live weight. That could be about 120 pounds. One body condition score anywhere from 80 to 100 pounds. And so we're going to easily add one body condition score in the next 60 days if we want to adjust our rations right now in order to get cows into that score that we desire them to be at when they are calving. And why that matters, here's some data from Patsy Houghton and how that body condition score matters for what they are doing, or how body condition as calving affects their long-term return to estrus. So females that are in a body condition score of 5 or 6 are going to take only about 50 to 60 days to return to estrus. In an annual 365-day calving interval, we have about 80 days from calving to rebreeding that we want to get those cows rebred in order to stay on that 365-day calving interval. And so if we have them in a good body condition score of that 5 or 6, they're going to hit that target. But you can see if we fall below into that 3 or 4 time frame, they're going to be starting to become really close to even have that first estrus cycle at the beginning of the breeding season, let alone be able to get bred at the beginning of that breeding season. And so that's another reason why we shoot to have that body condition score kind of dialed in at calving time, because in the long run, that will affect your next calf crop as your pregnancy, due to the pregnancy rates that coming year. When we continue talking about some nutrition, things related to more calving time, is that we can feed cows at a certain time of day in order to help them calve at night. And so a lot of this research initially was brought up and done in Canada, but has been replicated here in the United States by others. Looking to say, if we can feed cows in the evening, so for example, 4 to 6 p.m., we will increase the percentage of cows calving during daylight hours. Obviously, during daylight hours, it's a lot easier to, check cows and assist cows as needed. And so if something as simple as when we feed can help increase that percentage, why not give it a try? There's been some other studies by USDA ARS showing that when they, fed cows or excuse me, when they fed cows at night, they saw a decrease in cows calving between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. So it's not going to eliminate every single cow that's going to calve in the middle of the night, but it's really going to help increase that percentage to a time of day like 6 a.m. when you're going to be going out maybe for that first check anyways, or 10 p.m., when you're hopefully rounding out maybe your last checks of the night. And so, recommending that you start maybe trying this feeding regimen at least 2 weeks prior to the calving season, to not only kind of get yourself programmed, but also the cows programmed to be able to come to the bunk at that time of day. Be able to kind of get their system primed in order to have this practice be most effective. If we also want to do a little bit of preparation before calving with our herd, one thing we want to look at is that preg check sheet. And so if you have that handy, from your vet, or, maybe just have, months or days draw it out from your vet, what you can start doing is possibly sort those animals into calving intervals. And so you can kind of do that a couple of different ways. One example would be to, mark anything that's going to calve in the first 21 days by a certain tag color, second 21 days by another tag color, and so on. Just so maybe visually, as you're walking through the pen checking animals, you know that the green tags are the ones that are going to calve first. So as you're able to, do your checks, everyone who's doing them knows like these cows are going to calve first. Another way you could do that is if you did have adequate pasture space or yard space, is be to sort them into totally different groups. This would also help with some feed management. So you could feed cows that are going to calve very early in the season right away, or excuse me, feed them differently than ones that are going to calve later. So you could sort them, by heifers, the month they're going to calve. You could sort them also by body condition score at that time as well. So there's a bunch of different things that you could do to make it easier. So that way you're maybe not walking through every single cow at every check in order to get your best attention on the ones that are going to calve during that time frame. And obviously, there can be a little bit of overlap based on genetics. But if you can get an idea of maybe who's going to calve in the first 30 days and have them in one area, that's a lot easier to manage than checking the entire herd at one time. And some benchmarks that we have, recommended, or you can obviously go by, depending on what your calving interval is, or excuse me, your calving distribution is, might be something to look at next year and how you might be able to change that. But nationally, the goal would be to have 65% calved in the first 21 days, 85% by the second 21 days or day 42, and 100% by day 60 if you had a 60-day calving season. And so just some things to calculate for yourself after the fact. We'll talk a little bit about some resources on how to do that later, but that might be something to help you divide into groups to say, if you have your calving list, to say, I'm going to have 65% of my cows calving during this time. What are some other things that I need to look at in order to make sure I can accommodate the needs of that number of cows? So with that, we'll roll into kind of some facility prep questions. And so, if you have a large percentage of your cows calving early, what type of facility do you need to be able to handle that? If you're calving in January or February, likely a barn big enough to hold some of those animals throughout the night would be desired. We want that big enough so they can get some privacy away from other cows. Not all cows are going to need this, maybe heifers more so than cows, but try to give them adequate square feet in order to be able to kind of segregate themselves, get it up and down without necessarily being bothered by another animal. If you do have, some of those observation pens that are maybe not used up, you could put a cow that is going to be calving, into one of those pens, and so having some of those ready to be able to quickly put an animal that maybe does start showing those signs in if you think it's necessary, or being able to, like I said, give her adequate space in order that way she can get away from some other animals. If there is a need to, have eyes on animals as we're checking our facility. So whether that's walking through them, so good footing, good lighting is necessary in order to make sure we get a good light look at them during the daylight and at night. But also cameras for outdoor and indoor are becoming pretty popular. I've had several producers tell me that they never thought they would trust them, and now that they have them, they'll never go back to. It really helps eliminate some of those unnecessary checks. Also might speed up some labors for animals if they're not getting disturbed every half an hour by someone walking in or checking on them too. Obviously, cameras can be vastly different, so finding one that works good for your needs might save you some labor and maybe save some calves as in the long run. And then kind of back to that number of, cows you're going to be calving or heifers. And depending on the time of year, you might need bedding appropriate or stock that appropriately. So whether that's, straw or corn stalks inside and outside, having at least one bale per head is a pretty good rule of thumb. Depending on how muddy it can be in March or April, you might need to double that, but at least that gives you an idea of if you're going to be running every cow through the barn, mentally prepare yourself to have enough inventory on hand for some of those bedding needs as well. Along with the facilities, like I said, if you need a barn based on your environment that you're going to be calving in, you can also set up some pens inside that barn, whether it's for the assistance of that animal. So having a head gate or some kind of pulling pen might be necessary to make sure that's working. So make sure, like I said, that head gate works. Make sure the a bar if that's needed to, put behind the animal as you're loading works, all the gates are on the hinges or swinging the right way. Just general maintenance things that kind of get maybe forgotten about at the end of last year when you were just ready to be done with the calving season. So try to check over those things. The maternity pens are things that can be utilized once they do have, those calves, if they want to really segregate them or get them penned off by themselves in order to allow that mothering or a bonding time to happen. So these are often set up around the outside of the pen. Sometimes there's alleyways to make it easier to get cows into them as well. Just something that can be, collapsible, let's say, if you did need to make more barn space and can be put back up pretty easy. Usually a 10 by 10 or a 12 by 12 panels work really good for this. Anything smaller than that might lead to some damage or some injury if an animal steps on a calf or something like that. We don't want that to happen. So sometimes the bigger, the better, but 10 by 10, 11 or 12 by 12 is plenty adequate for cows or even for heifers as well. And then we want to make sure we have someplace warm to get those calves warmed up if needed. And so whether that is one of the blue calf warmers that you can plug in that blows some hot air, underneath of them, that'll really get their extremities warm, dry off their hair. You can make some homemade ones, like I have a picture of there, where it's more of, kind of a built-in heater, maybe a heat lamp, something like that. Ultimately, we want to make sure they're safe to be left unattended while you maybe go check on something else. Not necessarily saying that the free range heaters that are blow hot air into, a pen isn't going to be adequate, but like I mentioned with the straw and the bedding that are usually there, sometimes we want to make sure that we, like I said, can you leave it unattended and have the animal be warmed up? And so make sure those three things are ready to go in your facility checklist. Once we kind of get through the facilities, it's never a bad idea to take a look at your vet room or your vet box, whatever you have handy, in order to be able to grab in one box or one bucket all in one place when you need to provide some evaluation or some assistance for a cow. So we could start with, a simple bucket that you can put clean water in. We want to have some kind of soap or disinfectant in order to clean off the back end of that cow before we go in for an assessment. Plenty of OB sleeves. You're going to need one for each arm most likely every time you go in. So you're going to go through them maybe twice as fast as you do during breeding season. Not a bad idea to have an extra bag of those on hand. Lubrication can be your best friend at some these events. And so making sure you have that. You can mix that with water in the bucket in order to help lubricate all your supplies. And then also use it on the cow in order to help maybe lubricate the vulva and area that we're going to be working on, possibly to evaluate that calf that's hopefully coming out. Chains and straps are options in order to help you get a handle on that calf. Straps are a little bit harder to clean, but the stainless steel chains are maybe a little bit harder to put on. So it just kind of depends on your preference. Use something that works for you and then clean it accordingly. So that way we don't have any infection or cross contaminations going on there. The little triangle handles are very handy to help get a handle, like I said, on those chains or those straps. Be able to pull and add some pressure when that cow is pushing, and then possibly a calf jack if you don't have any assistance, kind of with those handles, but may not always be necessary for every case either. Some personal supplies we want to think about as we're preparing for the season. Not only we want to get the cows ready, the barn ready, but you're going to probably be running out of the house or asking someone to run out of the house to possibly help you with calving season as well. So if you're going to be doing night checks, make sure you have plenty of flashlights and batteries on hand. Christmas is coming up, so it's never a bad idea to get an extra spotlight for cows or for the farmer as they want to go out and check things on in the middle of the night. Usually we can find plenty of old towels with some holes or something just to be able to dry those calves off, help get them warmed up if needed. If you need to transport them in your vehicle, maybe a sheet or a comforter or something like that to be able to lay across the pickup seat might be something helpful as well. And then as well as a protocol. So maybe you're the only person, working, but let's say, your neighbor is available to come help you. Where's the protocol and of what to do with cows that either are calving? If she's, showing signs of labor, where do we take her? But another list of things of, if a pair needs to be brought in, where do we take those? Is it this barn? Is it that barn? Is it, are the pens already bedded? Do we need to get that done? What's kind of that protocol of, that way you can tell your help, your assistants, and so that way they know before there's a mad rush and the blizzard's here and we want to get everything in the barn as fast as possible. Make sure you have an updated list of people to call. If you have your vet's cell phone number, that's awesome. Make sure that's in the hands of all of your help as well. Like I said, if you have neighbors or family that are willing to come help as well, make sure we have those lists handy. And then don't forget to take care of yourself. Snacks, water. I like to say water to drink as well as wash your hands because sometimes nothing always stays clean. And so if we can have, a little bit of both handy in order to prevent any sickness, we want to do that. And then phones or chargers, anything like that, especially if you don't have service. Sometimes walkie-talkies work pretty well in order to make sure we can get a hold of you or make sure people know where you are if you are in need of assistance. And kind of with that plan of where to take calves, maybe making a plan for your help of who's going to take what checks can be identified now rather than when we're sleep deprived as well. So we can do, obviously night and day checks. We can do those on the cameras as well. There's a lot of night calving cameras or barn cameras that work really good for that. But it might go back to that preg checklist too of, how often do we need to be checking? We like to say that you can check every 3 hours is pretty common based on some national data that you can kind of catch, the stages and the signs of labor in that time point if you're catching or checking every 2 to 3 hours. But if it's like today where it's cold and windy, every 2 to 3 hours probably isn't going to be enough time to save an animal that does unfortunately get, born into this nice cold wind. Also, if you have synchronized animals, there's more of them going to be calving at one time. And so that might change the frequency of times you check those animals, just because you're going to be having many more start calving at a certain time. And then heifers are more likely the ones that are going to need some assistance. And so maybe those females you do night checks for, but maybe you don't do night checks on your cows. And so, having those plans lined up now to know that, when I'm done with heifers, I'm done with night checks, unless there's bad weather or something like that. So weather's never going to be able to be predicted, but obviously we can check accordingly based on kind of the resources that we have available and make plans to be successful. And why we do that is because 85% of death loss does occur in that first 10 days after birth. Not all of it is due to dystocia or some things that you might be able to catch if you do assist or can assist an animal. About 50% of it is due to dystocia. But there's several other things that we want to watch for too. So not only once the calf is born, but maybe there was some sort of hypoxia or something like that internally that you're not ever going to be able to see, but it could have a long-term effect on that calf, and maybe it dies a few days later. And so sometimes I feel during calving season, it rings true. Like if you can just get them through that first 2 weeks of life, then you're kind of smooth sailing from there. They're obviously, if it is nice and they're running around the pasture, that's great. But sometimes those first 10 days, can be pretty long because there's multiple weather events, there's multiple more cows calving, so you have to kick those fresh pairs out into a different pen. Maybe you're moving them around to a new facility based on calving time. So there's a lot of things going on. So it's not just a one and done deal, as we all know. Now, just to kind of go through the stages of labor to review, what's going on inside the cow as well as outside of the cow in order to see what's normal. And so there are three stages of labor technically that we want to observe going, through the calving season. So stage one is really those outward signs of discomfort that you're going to see. Obviously, those cows and heifers are probably filling a bag at that point. They're ligaments and vulva is really loosening. They're being able, when they lay down, that vulva kind of opens. Maybe there's some slime or some uterine fluid, maybe starting to come out, right, weeks or days before. It just kind of depends on the female. So those ones are getting close, right? But when they start kind of walking off to that far corner to segregate themselves, standing up and lying down quite a bit, maybe they don't come to the bunk that night to eat, they're off by themselves. Some of those signs that when you're around cows, you just start to know, oh, yep, she's probably going to calve tonight or tomorrow. They'll start showing those signs anywhere from 2 to 6 hours before you might even see a water bag. And then the uterine contractions are starting internally as well. So not necessarily going to see outward abdominal contractions at this point, but it really, like I said, can take anywhere from 2 to 6 hours. Heifers might be longer, and it ends when the rupture of that first water bag occurs and the cervix is fully dilated. So that has been happening at this point as well. Stage two is technically the delivery of the calf. So this begins when that cervix is fully dilated and able to accept that calf into the birth canal. That second water bag is coming up, with that. When that is presented and bursts, usually it's going to start seeing that the feet be presented externally, but your abdominal contractions are starting at this point. And so she's pushing. Maybe standing up, laying down, depending on where she's at in the process. And this can be a pretty quick process for cows, and it can be a little bit longer for heifers. But ultimately, the period takes about, anywhere from half an hour to 4 hours is what we like to say as a rule of thumb for this stage two. And the reason that we can't necessarily let this process go on forever is once that calf is presented into the birth canal, that umbilical cord is being pinched as well. And so we're cutting off some of that oxygen that's normally feeding that calf. And so there's only so long that can happen before something needs to be done if that calf is not successfully delivered. Also, things to watch for is the water bag over the face. If it is a natural birth, but that water bag doesn't get removed from the face, that can obviously cause some suffocation as they begin taking those first breaths of air. Since that umbilical cord is no longer connected. Some research done by Dornbos showing some assistance when it was given during calving. And so the black bars showed, the early versus late assistance was defined as early was giving assistance as soon as the second water bag appeared. And so as soon as that was done, they made sure the cervix was dilated and they assisted the delivery of that calf. Late assistance was when 2 hours after appearance of that water bag. And so didn't necessarily give assistance right away, but within 2 hours they were giving assistance. And so you can see in the black bars there, there's about a 17% difference in percent of cattle that were cycling at the beginning of the breeding season if they were given that early assistance versus late assistance. And then also about a 20% difference in pregnancy rate at that next breeding season for those early versus late assisted animals as well. So it's not to say you need to go assist every single animal that's going into labor. Um, but if the cervix is fully dilated and you have her in, the water bag's been there, maybe not for that long, but you haven't given her, too long to labor, it might be a good time to assist because it could possibly help them start cycling and rebreeding later. But like I said, not every animal needs assistance, but if the circumstances are there and you can assist them, that might be beneficial to long-term pregnancy and breeding of your herd. And the next stage would be the expelling of the placenta. So the calf was fully delivered. The calf is now, hopefully on the ground, getting licked off by the mom. And that placenta is the next step of stage 3 that technically fully has to be expelled before it is the calving labor season is done. And so obviously there's fetal membranes be with that as well. And this can take anywhere from 8 to 12 hours post-calving. Some might have it, hanging for a little while longer. We don't want to necessarily manually remove that because that could cause some damage. And then if an infection does appear, or even later, if you still see some trailings, that might be a good time to consult your veterinarian in order to get those taken care of. So that way there isn't any kind of uterine infection that would then inhibit her from returning to estrus and breeding back next year. So that would be kind of the wrap up of, the 3 stages we want to look at when we're delivering calves. And so if that everything goes normal, like I said, that can be done from the beginning stages to the end in 2 to 8 hours, right? We're going to have lots of time in there for, walking around and, moving them to a barn if needed. Might need to let them rest and get restarted. But if there is some signs of, difficulty of dystocia, so the inability of maybe them to have that calf for some reason, whether it's size, even presentation, or something else environmental that we, haven't can't control. Intervention is the next thing we're going to talk about in terms of, when do you go in to help with that delivery? And so stage 1, if we see stage 1 progressing for more than 8 hours, this is a sign that you might want to call someone or get them in to check, so that abdominal contractions haven't started. And so maybe it's still just the uterine contractions that are progressing, which could cause separation of that placenta and decrease the oxygen. And so we don't necessarily want to let that go on forever. Sometimes this will be the call that people have gotten to say, I thought she was going to calve yesterday, and they get in there and maybe that calf has passed at this point. And so with that separation, oxygen wasn't provided, and so we don't want to let that go on too long, even if it's a normal presentation. Stage 2 things to look at, if that water bag is not breaking after, so long. Usually a rule of thumb is 30 minutes with no progress is maybe it's a good time to start an assessment. So maybe bring her into the barn to get a closer look, do the exam, or maybe make that phone call to have someone come and do that if they're making absolutely no progress. They've been laying down for 30 minutes. You see the water bag, but nothing is happening. Those kind of timelines. And it's not a bad idea to set a timer to do that as well. We know there's lots going on. You don't want to rush things necessarily. You don't want to walk away for too long either. So we all have phones that usually can have some sort of a stopwatch on them. So not a bad idea to try to take that into account. And then obviously if you do see a malpresentation coming, that would also be another time to intervene as well. If we do see fetal stress occurring during the labor and delivery, that would be another sign. So if they are maybe calving, the tongue or the head are swollen, you can see maybe they've labored enough so far, they've run out of energy. Maybe there's some assistance you could provide at that point in order to help get the rest of that calf out. If you do see fetal membranes appear before the calf, sometimes that's not a good sign. Might be a backwards calf, might be some sort of malpresentation to look at. Um, if you see, the feet coming one way or the other. That obviously is a malpresentation we want to look at. If legs are crisscrossed, sometimes that can mean that they're really tight in that pelvic canal and they might need some assistance in order to get it out anyways. Or like I said before, if you see the water bag over the face, something you want to quickly remove so they can get oxygen to them. And so here's some pictures of, presentations that may or may not be coming normal, right? And so I like to look at the toes if you're just, checking out at pasture quick, and you see toes, the first thing you're going to do is say, which way are they pointing? So if they're pointing up into the sky versus pointing down to the ground. So the toes pointing to the sky, I say just hopefully they'll calve on their own, let her fly. Also, if you do have them in, a stanchion and you're assessing it, and you can see the toes. You can also palpate the joints. So the joints are going to be bending the same way on the front legs. So if they're coming the right way, those front joints are going to be bending the same way. If toes are pointing to the ground, this likely is a backwards animal, right? And so the joints are going to be bending the opposite way as well if you're palpating them or if you're just feeling in and you can't see anything yet. The joints are going to be bending the opposite way at that point. And so usually help is going to be necessary to get those out right away. And so if you do need to provide assistance, bring them into those calving pens that we talked about earlier. So hopefully having a way to restrain that cow, whether it's in a head gate with a chain behind her, some sort of a panel, that way you can have a quick release, but also still have that cow restrained if needed, in order to perform that palpation. So you can get in with your OB sleeves and water and lube to make sure you palpate her through the vulva to say, is the cervix fully dilated? Is the first step. So, can I get my hand over top of that calf's head? If the legs are already partially out, like how far can I pull them out? Just to make sure that we have an idea of even if that calf is going to fit that way. Next, we want to evaluate the calf position. So is it coming normally? Kind of back to the limbs. Are they bending? Are they front legs or are they back legs? Is it a big calf? Does it feel really big? But is the presentation normal as well? So if there's only one leg and one leg is down, that's something we need to correct before we can even get to the next step of trying to extract that calf. If both legs are down, if it's backwards, what are the steps we're going to do in order to rearrange those calves? And then next, we want to check on the fetal reflexes. So is that calf still alive? So we can pinch between its front toes usually, or even the back toes if it's backwards. They'll kind of pull that foot out from you. So you can make sure it's alive, be able to pull back at you and have that reflex. If maybe you can stick your finger in its mouth and it'll suckle or be able to feel that tongue move, that's another good sign that we still have time in order to help get this calf out successfully. So having that SOP handy, whether it's for you or your help, in order to make sure they're restrained correctly, you're evaluating it to make sure that it's going to fit before we start getting too far ahead of ourselves in order to, put it where we're going to put chains on and actually pull that calf out. So if the head is not positioned correctly, let's reassess that. If the leg is down, and we can't get it up after 15 minutes, that 15-minute rule is pretty handy in order to try something for 15 minutes. If it doesn't work, try something else or make that call for someone else to provide you assistance. Maybe you make the call right away because you don't think you can do it, but then you continually maybe to work slowly and safely on that animal for 15 minutes in order to try to get that calf in the right position. Because if it is in the right position, then we can talk about putting the chains on, pulling when the cow pushes in order to kind of work together with those abdominal contractions, making sure we follow the natural calving behavior of those cows, rotate that calf through the pelvis in order to avoid hip lock, and hopefully successfully deliver a calf. And so here's just a graphic of some presentations, or at least one presentation of like a leg down. When we have this scenario, happening, both front legs coming forward with the nose is your normal presentation, right? So you have your front leg stretched out, you have your head between those front legs, and they're pushing on that cervix. And so that's going to be performing that cervical dilation that we need, as well as the vaginal dilation. Like that has to happen as well. And so all of that needs to be dilated in order to get that calf out, because we don't want to get it stuck halfway out either. And so if a malpresentation is occurring, it's likely not going to be fully dilated. So that's kind of where that manual dilation might be needed. And that's something you as the producer can do pretty easily yourself. This is something I have done quite often as a smaller person, I would say. I'm not always super strong or confident that I'm going to be able to pull that animal out myself. But if I can prepare the area, maybe by putting my hands into the cervix and pushing out towards the pelvis in order to manually just stretch that out, that can be really helpful in order to, so that way when the next person comes to be able to help me, we can already have that cervix prepped and ready to go. Um, Once we get that leg up, then we'd be able to pull that calf out. Backwards calves are going to be, the joints bending the opposite way. We already talked about that. Then, that's going to present a different problem of, your hips are going to be the first thing through rather than the head. So it's going to be a little bit more stressful in terms of that presentation. The head back is something that you can use, some equipment for in order to straighten that out, in order to make sure that's coming correctly, and then continually assessing that head to make sure it doesn't fall back. Because if it has fallen back once, it's likely maybe that uterus and the cervix and vagina, they're not all stretched out yet, and so it's not working together. So continually assessing is something that someone has told me over and over, just to make sure that just don't check it once. Make sure you're checking it several times as you progress through the assistance process. So here's some pictures, just an example of like a leg back scenario where you might have to push the animal back in order to get it out. And so, we found the cow out calving out at pasture and had one leg coming and the nose, right? And so we got her in, and now we need to try to get that other leg up, because with the shoulders the way they are, with one leg up and one leg down, it's not going to be as cohesive of a transition through that birth canal. And so what this picture is showing is taking your arm and pushing on the front of that shoulder of that calf and almost pushing it all the way back in to the shoulder length of that person, back into that birth canal. And so hopefully the calf will retreat back that far, once they're up to that position. Sometimes that can be hard to do, but hopefully if you do some lubrication and things in there, you can feel around and push that calf back out. Then at that point, hopefully that other leg, might pop up, or the knee will pop up, and then you can cup the toes and be able to hopefully work that front leg back up into a frontward position. People have used chains, they've used like a rope or like a tube of some sort in order to kind of dally around that leg too. That might be something helpful in order to try to get that leg up. But just an example that is not necessarily a bad idea, or thought that you have to push something in before you can pull something out. Same way with twins. If you get, multiple limbs and, things not necessarily progressing the way they are, if there's twins in there, might take some time to rearrange them by pushing them a little bit back in if you can, and making sure you have one animal coming through that birth canal at a time. Here's just some quick pictures of a head back, for example. The toes are coming normal, but just a key to, like I said, check that head position and presentation before you start pulling on those legs to make sure that nose is coming straight out. If the both front legs are down, that can be maybe one of those signs where stage 2 just doesn't progress and doesn't progress. Um, might sometimes be missed because that water bag isn't fully pushed out all the time. So those ones are a little bit trickier to spot. But if we do get it into the birth canal in the right position, we want to talk about proper OB chain placement. And so we want to do a double half hitch if possible. And so what this means is putting two loops on the front leg of that animal. And so the first loop would go above the fetlock joint, and then doing a half hitch with that chain over the front, running over the ridge or the top of that foot, and then half hitching it to be able to put another loop below or above the dew claw, but on the bottom side, or excuse me, below the dew claw on the bottom side of that fetlock joint. And so this is going to give us the safest way to put the pressure on those joints and while we pull them out. So this can be done with one long chain, two short chains. The handles can be helpful in order to keep those loops on as you work on the other limb as well. So just a point to keep in mind that this is going to hopefully prevent any broken limbs, fractures, or anything like that. And if you think you don't have the time to do it, hopefully the pressure or learning to do it quickly, isn't necessarily the key. It's just making sure that you have it on there right in order to not cause you more damage in the long run. And then, as I kind of mentioned on that SOP, is we want to work with the cow as she's pulling or she's pushing. So when she's pushing, we want to pull. When she kind of relaxes, you want to relax. You want to still kind of let her do the work. You're just assisting. And so when we get past the head and shoulders, we kind of get that rib cage in there. And when the cow is naturally calving, that rib cage is kind of naturally curving to be on a more vertical position. And this is to align those hips in order to be in a vertical position as well. And so the tallest point or the widest point of that pelvis is vertically or top to bottom. And so if we can kind of help, whether it's putting an arm between the front legs of that calf and twisting it in order so that its pelvis is twisting, so that way it fits a little bit better through the cow's pelvis. That's one thing we can do to hopefully avoid hip lock. Because at that point, your umbilical cord is breaking or broken, and we need to get that calf out so they can take their first breath and not be hip locked in there, which would obviously be another issue that we need to deal with. So just kind of some steps to walk through. If you have, like I said, checked and you need to provide help, make sure you're checking the position. If it's not correct, we need to correct it. Once we have, that corrected, is it possible to continue extraction that way? Is it too big? Like, was it correct, coming incorrectly for another reason? Is the calf dead or alive? And then do you need to make that call to your veterinarian in order to assist in a successful delivery? Some other helpful reminders. I've talked about, I think all of these already, so I'll skip through that. But if we do have a successful delivery, the cow is still in the stanchion. It's never a bad idea to go back and look for more. I talked about twins, but one calf can easily hide another. And so palpating them just to be reassured that there's maybe not another one coming while she's in there, so you don't have to get her back in again, is always a good idea. You also want to watch for a uterine prolapse because with the dystocia and the stress, there might be an increased likelihood that she could have that occur. Not a guaranteed, obviously, every time you assist something that they're going to prolapse, but if they do, a uterine prolapse needs to be taken care of right away. So that's an emergency call that you would need to make. And then also milk letdown. And so, like I said, the bags are going to be filling on these cows, hopefully a couple weeks ahead of time. Heifers might not have the biggest bags right away, but it's not bad to check to say, okay, like her teats are kind of full. We want to make sure there's some sort of milk there, because in order for that calf to be successful, we need to get it some colostrum in the first couple hours of life. And so if that calf is out, we want to check for stimulation. We want to dry it, like stimulate its breathing, whether that's putting some straw in its nose. It might be shaking its head, trying to get some of that, fluid out of its mouth or lungs. We do not want to swing them upside down. We want to try to set them sternal. And so that would be, back legs straight out, front legs tucked underneath of them. You can do front legs out too, just to kind of get that balance set so that animal can start kind of finding its center, and then trying to get that calf warmed up. So whether it's in a dry straw area, let the mother start looking on it. If you can't get it in a dry area right away, maybe that's where the calf box comes in order to kind of help that warm up a little bit faster. And then making sure we get it to colostrum. So hopefully they'll stand within a half hour, of birth, hopefully within 2 hours at least. And that's in order to hopefully aid that nursing, of that cow. And so if you aren't thinking that it's going to be able to do that, that's where a colostrum replacer could come in handy. And so a replacer is going to give your full dose of colostrum that we want within the first couple hours of birth. So whether it's 2 liters or 3 liters of colostrum within 2 hours of birth from that first milk of the cow or through a commercial replacer, will give that calf a great start, not only for health wise, hopefully prevent some scours, but long-term health benefits as well. If you think that cow or that calf nursed a little bit, but you aren't super sure that it got all of it, that's maybe where one of those supplements are needed. This is going to have a little bit less IgGs in it. Going to be a little bit cheaper as well, depends. But having both on the shelf should be something you consider so that way you have it handy because it is kind of a timely thing that we need to look at doing. And then we can talk about a little bit about calf processing. So lots of different things you can do when that calf is born, whether you had to help it calve or not. Whether we want to tag that animal right away. If it's cold, we might want to wait so that way we don't damage that ear and cause any kind of freeze damage, or we should cause some of that ear to not necessarily recover. You can use, some bands, around the legs, maybe just to put a quick ID number on it. If there's, a certain tagging number that you have to give it, you can document that in your book and then come back and tag it later. Um, Another thing you could do is weigh it. I know this is obviously really popular with seed stock folks, but even commercial folks, like if you are having, a couple challenging births from a certain group of animals, whether that's heifers or a certain pasture that a couple bulls were in, certain sire specific things, it might not be a bad idea to weigh some of those to get an idea if it was the weight, but it could have been the presentation or of that calf as well. Maybe it just had a big head, but the rest of it's just fine. And so some of those things are visual records, not necessarily weights, but things you might want to write down as well. Are you going to give it a vaccine, whether that's an intranasal, clostridial, or an overeating, anything like that, in order to kind of set themselves up for that milk that they're going to be eating? In terms of some management things that you can do, if you do run them through the barn, sometimes navel dips can be nice, or obviously even if they're outside, in order to prevent any or help dry out that navel and prevent any infection, in order to prevent any navel infections. There's lots of tubes and nutrients and energy and fat supplements that might be available to give them a quick boost. There's obviously natural things like honey and things like that people have tried as well. Really just kind of gives them that, dose of an energy that they might want. Not necessarily saying it could work on everything, but if a calf is slow, might be something to talk to your vet about, or your feed supplier, to say, what are some things that I can do just to have on hand. If you're going to be banding any bulls at birth, you can do that. Providing a tetanus shot with that would be ideal. And then some other things for management wise, like if you're going to need a tattoo or a DNA or put EID buttons in for your new a form of ID, you can do that right away at birth as well. And then, like I said, once you kind of have them calved and maybe paired out, one way to do that and to hopefully try to keep them healthy is to follow that sandhills calving system model. So this would be moving the cows that haven't calved to a clean pasture every so often. And so the theory is you're leaving behind pairs that are the same age. And an environment where they can continue growing, being fed or grazing, however it works, and then you're going to be moving new cows that haven't calved yet to a clean pasture in order to decrease that pathogen load that they're going to be exposed to right away during their birthing events. And so this can look different for everybody, but it really can be beneficial to some health things if you do run into some health issues, might be something to consider trying that wouldn't necessarily be something you have to buy or supplement either. And lastly, I'd already mentioned a bunch of things that you could write down in the record keeping book, but if you want an idea kind of that calving distribution, you could, put the dates that the cows were or cows calved, maybe, the sexes of the calves, so you know how many bulls versus heifers you have at the end of the season, single versus multiple, and then obviously that calving score should be noted if you did have to provide assistance. That would be helpful to look at, especially the next preg check or next breeding season to say, oh, maybe she, I had to help her calve. She didn't breed back right away early either. Um, just some things to consider. Udder scoring would be another one. Bull sire names, if you have those as well. But ultimately, if we can have a successful calving season, this drives our profitability across the cow-calf realm. If we can provide that timely assistance, whether it's with DeSocia or just, keeping an eye on things, we can hopefully increase calf average daily gain because they have a good leg up on the year. The cows will hopefully have an early return to estrus and then also hopefully greater pregnancy rates in that subsequent breeding season as well. So here are some resources from SDSU Extension. These are on the website, extension.ststate.edu. One is the beef management book. Lots of great chapters in there on cow-calf production. One great one on understanding the calving season. And then the other one is the beef repro management scorecard that you can type in kind of your calving season data as well as your breeding season, your weaning season, and kind of get those benchmarks for your herd. We also have a calving distribution calculator you can do as well in order to see how you can improve 5% or 10% every year and how that might affect your profitability. And if you're looking for more resources, we do have some calving camps coming up. I'm hosting them. One is in Mitchell here on January 6th. And then my Watertown one I rescheduled from last week due to weather is now going to be on January 14th. And so registration is available for those on this extension website. But you can always call any of our beef team on the extension, whether they can or see if they can help you during calving season. And so here's my contact information. Like I said, I'm in the Mitchell Regional Office. And if you have any questions now, I will do my best to answer them.
Yeah, so thank you, Taylor, for sharing some really great information for folks to consider as, they prepare for the upcoming calving season. And we'll go into the discussion portion of our webinar. And don't see any questions in our chat. So just to kick things off here then. So you shared a lot of great information, but I was just wondering if you had one key take home point for folks to consider, what would you recommend for folks and what would that be?
I think with the value of, calves this year, obviously no one's going to be neglecting to pick or check their cows, right? So, I mean, it's not anything novel that we're telling you to check them, but I really think if you do have the capability to sort them into those calving groups, that can be something super easy to do just so you can get a better check on each group as you go out and do those checks. Because if you're checking in February and she's not going to calve till April, like you really don't need to probably be having her right up front with everybody else. But that's one thing I would say.
Yeah, and like I'll just echo what Taylor said there at the end with the calving camps coming up. Yeah, please feel free to check those out. There can be something Taylor's getting going this year that'll be really exciting and share some more information and some hands-on demos for if you still have some questions for preparing for upcoming calving season. So, um, but I guess Julie, did you have something to add there? Sorry, you.
Oh, my quick question was, so if I haven't timed or when I preg checked, I didn't know when my cows are going to calve, how am I going to know that to sort them now? Because, I'm kind of lazy, so I probably didn't do the records or whatever, and now I'm wanting to sort them, but how do I sort them when I don't have that? And they all look pregnant now, so the difference is, am I going to touch the nose or not, kind of thing, so.
Right. In that regard, I guess I think I would have a better plan of, how to go about, whether it's monitoring them or the type of facilities you need, because I mean, ultimately, if you have 25 cows, you're not going to sort those anyways, right? Like you maybe did a really late preg check and you just had pregnant versus open too, right? So, you could just try to see, on a normal calving distribution, right? Or breeding season, I guess, we would expect 5% of cows to come in heat every day. So if you had, 20 cows that you were breeding and you expect 5% of those to come in heat every day, that was only one a day, right? And so you're going to give each of those equal attention in order to be able to watch those coming into, the calving season. And so just having your facilities, ready to go. Obviously, you're never ready for the first one, right? We say, I think it's the third calf that hits the ground is officially the beginning of your calving season. But once you're ready, hopefully then it's go time for you.
Thank you.
And like Erin said on those calving schools, we are working with Mitchell Tech and Lake Area Tech currently to post those. And so they're going to be using kind of a large cow model in order to give you guys hands-on experience. But then us at Extension we're also working on getting kind of more like a tabletop one as well. And so that's something that we're going to have hopefully available by January and be able to kind of travel around with that too. So Dr. Aaron and Dr. Walker are going to be able to hopefully be able to give you guys, if you want some assistance and training, we can always get that to you guys as well.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, and if anybody else has any specific questions for Taylor, please feel free to reach out to her directly. And then to be sure to check out our SDSU Extension website for upcoming Cal HQ live events, as well as, again, other fun things out there like the calving camps. We do have a brief survey that will be sent to you here at the end of our webinar that we ask you to fill out so we can continue to improve our webinar series. Thanks everyone that joined us today and joined us throughout the year. We'll be continuing this series for the upcoming 2026 year, so feel free to check that out. And we greatly appreciate you all being here today and taking the time. So thanks, and see you in 2026.